Please welcome Steve Kroft and Stephen Shepard.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone. I want to say, on behalf of Steve Kroft and myself, first of all, congratulations to all the winners tonight, the scholarship winners, the journalism winners, the educators. We really honor what you do, and we're very, very pleased to see such great work being done. So thank you all very much for that. Steve, good evening. It's
Great to be here, Steve.
Bevy of Steves here. You've been with 60 Minutes now approaching 24 years. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
On such a great run.
Survival has been my most important accomplishment.
Right. You know, just in the last 3 or 4 years, how would you say that 60 Minutes has changed as a program? And then I want to ask you to comment about what you think is likely to happen to the program over the next 2 or 3 years, the foreseeable future anyway.
I don't think it's changed that much over the last 3 or 4 years. I think that, the most obvious change is probably that we don't have Andy Rooney, and that Mike Wallace hasn't been around really since 2008, so it goes back longer than 3 or 4 years. There was a big transition internally when Don Hewitt left the show, who was the founder, and another one when Ed Bradley died. And I think that he was a huge presence on the show. And since then, I think except for some missing faces, the show has not changed very much to the viewer at all. Internally, it's changed a little bit in the way that we gather news and the way the show is organized. But in some ways, it's closer to the original than during Don Hewitt's age. It's much more, it's funny, it's not really a news show. You know, we talk about it's a little ironic to be here at the Deadline Club talking to journalists when my next deadline is like the middle of September.
How do you get such a job?
How do you get those jobs? Well, it took me a while to get it, but it's a pretty good job. But you still have to work.
Yeah.
And right now I'm shooting stories for next season. But I think that it is not really a news show because our job is not to break news. We do from time to time break stories, original stories. It's more, it's a primetime program. And it is, in many ways, was the first sort of combination of news and entertainment. It's about journalism. It's nonfiction television. It's storytelling. It's journalistic in nature, but you might have now the show is more likely to be a hard news story at the top, sort of an off news story and background piece, in-depth reporting, semi-investigative, and something light at the end. And that was the original formula, and kind of got away from it, and I think we're getting back to it. The challenge for the show ahead is going to be find replacements. You know, we have to refill the talent pool, and that's not that easy right now. We've been looking for someone to hire really as a full-time correspondent for a number of years and have had difficulty finding somebody that has all of the skills that we need at 60 Minutes, that wants to come work on the show and kind of give up their life to travel around the world. I know it sounds very glamorous, and it was certainly glamorous to me, but so many people think that they can make more money right now, anchoring a talk show in the afternoon for one of the cable news networks and not having to leave. And so it's hard to find somebody who's got foreign experience or Washington experience or economic experience that's really well-rounded, that is smart, that can do interviews, and that can work,
That's always tough.
It is tough. And also, I should point out at Table 6, my staff here, some longtime producers and some new producers who do a lot of work, and it's really a collaboration.
Can you speak about what plans you may have for the election coverage?
I think it will depend on how it unfolds. We did quite a bit of election coverage 4 years ago, presidential election coverage, and in part because we didn't have an incumbent, and it was both races
Yep.
were very interesting, and the final presidential race was very interesting. We'll continue to interview the presidential candidates. I'm not sure that Mitt Romney has agreed to sit down with 60 Minutes. I'm sure we will probably go out and cover some key states, interesting elections as they develop. I think we'll probably pay attention to some congressional races and the control of the House and the Senate and the main issues that are coming due. But it's so, it's still only, Labor Day used to be the official beginning of the campaign, and it still probably is. And people say, what do you think? And I say, I've got no idea. And it's going to change 15 times between now and then. And so many things can happen.
Yeah. You've interviewed Obama probably a dozen times, and as Alex said, you had the first interview after he was elected in 2008, and you interviewed him for the first interview after Osama bin Laden was killed.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what that experience is like. What is he like? What's he like up close and personal? Is what you get what you see? What's he like?
Yeah, one of the reasons I've interviewed him, I think, a dozen times, going back to before he declared his candidacy. Frank Devine, one of my producers, and I went out there and spent the better part of a week with him, first around Washington and then in Chicago. And it was when it was just Obama and Robert Gibbs and David Axelrod and David Plouffe. That was it. There were 4 of them. And so you had a lot of time with him. You could sit down, you could talk. We rode around in the car for hours. We got a pretty good rapport, and I followed up and covered him during the presidential campaign for 60 Minutes and have kind of continued on. So it's interesting to see the change in him. But he is, I would say, if you took away the title, I would still say he's one of the best interviews in terms of somebody being able to sit down and talk to you. He tries really hard to answer the questions. He tries really hard to answer the questions. The most amazing thing to me about him, in all of the 12 times that I've interviewed him, and we've talked about Afghanistan policy, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about all of this stuff. He has never had somebody in the room or an aide in the room and stop and say, what is this? I don't know about this, whatever. He can take on any question. And we've never had to come back later and edit something out, to my knowledge, of which he misstated something. So he's obviously engaged. He is personally a little distant, but totally in the moment.
Distant meaning there's not a lot of small talk, or there's
No,
not?
no. He comes in and he's very cordial. He'll remember the last time we talked. He'll remember what, maybe what clothes I was wearing. We have this thing where are both former smokers trying very hard. Every time I see him now, he gives me a couple of pieces of Nicorette gum, which he uses, and if he's out, then I will give some to him. That's sort of the running joke.
Do you get the sense that he's sneaking on the side? I didn't ask you if you were sneaking on the side.
No, there's a guy, Reggie Love, who was his sort of his body person. We were down there once for an interview, and he said, "Boy, you should have been around here yesterday. It was awfully smoky." So I
thank you for answering the question.
Yeah. So
Is he funny? Does he have a good sense of
He's
humor?
got a wonderful sense of humor. He's the most amazing thing about him, he is distant and totally engaged at the same time. If he is with you, or he is talking to you, or he is meeting you, he is there.
Yeah.
He's not distracted. He's not looking away.
Yeah.
He's not trying to get out of the room. He'll wait until his aides say, "Come on, you got to go."
Yeah. So he sounds like he's very intellectually focused, but a little emotionally distant. Is that
Emotionally distant, and I think that one of the main criticisms that I've heard, one of the consistent criticisms, is the fact that he has not made very good use of his cabinet, that he is not great at delegating. He wants to be involved in every decision, and his management style, I think, is totally, he's totally involved and also sort of above it, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
he likes to withdraw, he likes to look at situations analytically, and to be very much involved in the decision.
Yeah. He's now got a rough road. The economy is not cooperating, recovery is sluggish. What do you think he can say or do between now and Election Day to enhance his chances? Or is it sort of beyond his control? Whatever's going to happen with the unemployment rate is going to happen?
Whatever, I think that I think it's going to be a very nasty campaign. I think it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. I think that he will have to be, I think he'll go after all the Romney gaffes during the primary, and it will be it will just be divided sort of along the same lines that have divided politics in this country for 4 years. And, to tax or not to tax, spend or not to spend. I think those are going to be the big issues, healthcare.
Do you think he's not been as effective as he could have been in getting that economic message across about, what we inherited and how serious it was, and fiscal crises are very difficult. They're not normal recessions. They're very long-lasting, and that, what Romney is proposing amounts to Herbert Hoover economics, and we tried those policies before. They don't work. You can't have austerity, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think he's been effective in getting his message across?
I think I think that's been part of his message all along. And, but you only have so many sound bites that that are pulled out of speeches. And so you may have heard it once or twice, and people say, he said that before, it's not news, we're looking for something new. It's amazingly hard, I think, if you're president of the United States. You need to get your message out sometimes, in part because I'm not a big fan of the cable news shows, and in part because you have politicians mostly talking to each other, getting their main talking points for the day out. And there's too much political talk and not enough serious talk about the issues and about the economy. You're likely to get more of it on CNBC than you are on some of the cable channels. But I think you'll hear that in the debates. Yeah. I think the debates will be very important, probably in the election. I think that well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to change the subject slightly to talk about the European debt crisis. And
I think that's going to have has the potential to have
America,
a huge impact.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's anything at the White House that scares them more right now than that. Mm-hmm. It is essentially what's happening is that you are nearing a Lehman Brothers moment in Europe. This problem has existed for a long time. They have not made decisions, and now it's becoming quite clear that the situation can no longer be contained, and that something has to happen. They're looking at 2008 over there right now, and the possible repercussions if Greece goes into complete default, if Spain needs more money, and there are bank runs going on right there now. All these European banks are going to be stuck with huge government debts, and they have to figure out what they're going to do, and it's going to have some impact on the banks here. I think that most of what I've been told is that the big banks became risk averse, obviously, after the debacle in 2008, and loaded a lot of their debt, the European debt that they've held. But it's still, Europe is about the size of the United States in terms of population and GDP, and if they go into a serious recession or a depression, it's going to have impact here.
So, and obviously they have to do it. It's up to them.
They have to do it.
There's not much
and
Obama
it's not even easy for them to do it, because they have got 17 different countries. They don't have the Federal Reserve Board that can sort this thing out. They have a central bank that is the only sort of general economic force. But they have all sorts of rules, things they can't do. I think what's going to happen, and what everybody that I've talked to on Wall Street has said, was that is that there's no way for them to manage it with 17 different countries. What they're going to have to do is to go to a Eurobond where all of the European countries agree to assume the debts of each other. It requires it requires legal changes and things like that, and it requires Germany to sign on. And then the result would be that Germany does it. They're going to want a lot of control. They're going to have to be much more, they'll become much more centralized, much more like the United States. And they're going to start off in not very good financial shape.
Yeah. So it doesn't sound like much good is going to happen between now and the election, and therefore, if they're in a recession, it affects us because it's happening when China is slowing down, when India is slowing down, when Japan is still stagnating. There's not going to be any growth in the world, and it becomes very hard for the U.S.
Right, and some of the China thing is Europe, and
that's
some of the
it.
things in India is Europe already. But don't undersell the Europeans' ability to postpone. Never underestimate the ability of any politician to postpone
Yeah.
and avoid a difficult decision. And they may have the ability to kind of get through through this next election in November before the consequences hit. But it's a dicey situation.
Yeah. Let me change the subject slightly just to talk in a couple of minutes we have left about what's on the mind of a lot of people here, which is, the future of journalism. And let's just start with TV news, which you obviously know very well. What do you see that worries you, and what do you see that gives you cause for optimism?
Well, obviously, on the optimistic side, I still have a job, which a lot of people in the business don't have. And I'm fortunate enough to be on a program that is continuing. It's lost a little audience, but it is holding its own. I see everything everything shrinks in television news. And it's the same problem that you have with the newspapers too. The financial model is broken. And I'm optimistic about the fact that I think that the online editions, for example, of the New York Times, which I think is fantastic, is done well. I don't see the New York Times becoming obsolete. I think information has never been more important right now to individuals all over the world than it is in the present. And I think people will pay a premium for that. The hard part is that, and if the Times and the other newspapers, publications, national treasures, I call them, because they do they are the ones that have funded investigative reporting and good foreign reporting, which is very, very important. And I think if they can fulfill that, regenerate, take their circulation and get people to pay for internet use, I think it'll survive. But the big problem is that even if you do well, the revenue right now from online, which the structure seems really weird to me, and that papers aren't getting compensated enough. It's not enough to pay for the editorial, the gathering of the editorial content. Are we going to just say, well, nobody's going to gather the editorial content? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think somebody's going to figure out a way to do it. What I see more and more is that I think the future model is going to be newspapers where you've got websites that will be both video and audio. You still have them. I think the newspapers are already starting to get into the business and hiring sort of what they call electronic journalists, people who can shoot and edit film and take cameras out there and to do both. The problem is then everybody is like working and turning around constant deadlines, and the people in this room knows more about that than I do. You have very little time to think. You're constantly on deadline. And so the job becomes more of a challenge, and I'm afraid that we're losing a little bit of the quality. That it worries me. I can't say that. I know that the major newspapers, the New York papers are still, very good. But I'll tell you one story that I remember hearing at a dinner sort of like this with Tom Wolfe told the story. He says the first thing that you need to know about journalism and becoming a good journalist is you have to leave the building. And he told the story about the first day when he was at the Herald Tribune, and somebody told him to do a story on some up guy. And so he left the building, got on a train, went out to Queens, knocked on the guy's door. The guy let him in. Nobody had ever tried to actually interview this guy. Guy let him in, showed him around the house, and he wrote up a great piece. You got to leave the building. And I see too many people today just with the headphones on, sitting at their desk, not leaving the building. And part of it is deadline pressure. Part of it is you got to file. And I think the value of leaving the building is tremendous. And I think you need to have people. I'm going on a little bit, but the idea that CBS has closed down almost all of its foreign bureaus, the fact that the LA Times and the Miami Herald have closed down most of their foreign bureaus, the fact that the Times has made cutbacks, I'm not sure how many foreign bureaus, those are outposts that are incredibly important, independent operations where we have very smart people on the ground and who can come back and tell people in America what's really going on, not taking the word for some stringer in that country. That's a tremendous resource,
Yeah.
and I think somebody's going to pay for it. And it's what was said earlier. It's a great business. It's like people going to law school and never practicing law. And journalism is really only a 1 or 2 year commitment. A graduate school is, a year and a half. You learn how to process information. You learn how to write. You learn if you decide you want to leave and do something else. I think it's a bright future I think it's still a great profession.
Yeah, good. All right, we're going to stop there. He did say it's a great profession. That's a good note to stop on. And we'll try to take a couple of questions from the floor.
So you mentioned earlier that you're having trouble finding someone who kind of fulfills the exact model of what you're looking for. Tell us about the job description.
I just knew that question was going to come.
Seriously,
Yeah.
what's the model of what someone needs to be able to do in this day and age?
Well, traditionally, there haven't been that many people first of all, it's not my decision either. But in the past, at 60 Minutes, you've only had a small number of people who have really done the job full time. And all of them had 20 years experience before they got to 60 Minutes. And had, people who had covered courthouses, who covered state legislatures, who had maybe done a stint either overseas or in Washington and in bureaus around the United States, and had filed lots of reports for the CBS Evening News and distinguished themselves and was of a certain age where you're looking to bring somebody in. I think that there are certainly great reporters at CBS, some of whom fit that, some of whom, most of whom are real true professionals. To find somebody who's 20 or who's 40 years old, who has got you think has a strong future, that is incredibly well seasoned and done all this stuff, there just aren't that many people around who are interested in doing this job. I know it sounds really crazy, but I think there's more money right now in being an anchorman, and I think that people feel that the cable news networks have created all of these anchor positions. And it's been hard to try and find somebody who we think is good, who wants to do it really badly, who says, I'd love to be on 60 Minutes, that's all I want to do.
Okay, we'll send up your applications, and we'll see if we can't find somebody qualified.
Can you just talk a little bit more about what you think Mitt Romney would be like as a guest on 60 Minutes?
Mitt Romney? I don't want to touch that with a 20-foot pole. He's been on 60 Minutes before. Mike Wallace interviewed him, I think when he ran 4 years ago, or when he was governor of Massachusetts, making noises about running, and he did all right. He did all right.
What was Mike's "forgive me" question, you know?
I don't know. That
to
was,
run-
I think, Mike's next to the last interview he did.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And Mitt told me that he took a nap in the middle of it. He went into the bedroom when they were doing some changes and laid down for about 20. At that point, I think Mike would have been probably about 86.
Yeah.
And but Mike was always tough, even at 86. I wanted to clarify one thing. It's not like I'm the greatest reporter in the world, and it's not like 60 Minutes people are the greatest in the world. It takes a certain skill set, and it takes somebody in television and somebody who can tell a story, who's really good at telling stories and can write, and has sort of what they used to say. It's sort of an unusual package.
Yeah, it's sort of long form on television,
Yeah,
which is
it's
not
long form on
which
television.
is not that.
It's completely different
Yeah.
than doing something for a newspaper. And so you have to have somebody that really gets it and understands it.
Yeah.
Looking back at all your experience, do you think you do a better interview when you like the person that you're talking to, when you don't like the person that you're talking to, or when you don't have an opinion?
I think that when I'm doing profiles and things like that, I won't do a profile unless it's somebody I like. Because I don't want to, if it's a singer or an actor or a musician, I don't see the point. I did it once with Russell Crowe, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for as an actor, but he was having a few personal problems at the time we did the interview. And I'd rather spend time if I'm going to, one of the great parts about the job is I get to spend time with people who I admire and who have incredible talent and are still interesting and can talk and sit down and have an interview with. So I prefer not to spoil it by spending all those times with somebody I really don't like. I think that it's an interesting question. I've never actually had that question asked before. I think sometimes it helps to have a little bile built up if you're doing a tough interview with somebody who needs to have a tough interview done with them. And by the time we go out and actually sit in the chair and look at them in the face, we know a lot about them. We know where we're going to go, and we have pretty much sealed off all the exits of escape. So it helps to get yourself sort of worked up into that. Neutral is my normal state, and I try not to be, too. I try to keep an open mind about people and pay attention to what they're saying. Don Hewitt always used to, I think that you're more inclined to give somebody you like or somebody who you think is being honest with you a break on something. And as you all know in the room, sometimes you come down to situations what exactly did they mean? Am I taking a cheap shot by using this? You tend to give the benefit of the doubt to either people who you may need to be a source at some later point in your career, or to people that you find some affinity for and you think that they have given you help. Don Hewitt, on the other hand, always used to say, give the guy, the bad guy, a little bit extra at the end, just to show that you're being fair, even if you don't have to. Don't make him look like a complete jerk, and it's the right thing to do, and
Yeah,
I agree.
It enhances your credibility.
It enhances our credibility.
Yeah. Okay.
And it cools them down, and if you find yourself getting sued, and I have to say that we've never been successfully sued in 40-some years, it helps. You can say, look, we went out of our way to try and make it look.
Do you think news has lost its balance and become too opinionated?
Well, I tend to think it depends on what your definition of news is. If you're talking about, I think we are drifting towards the British model. I think you see it in the Murdoch publications here and with Fox. I think you see it at NBC, or MSNBC, which has obviously taken sort of a counter position in terms of the cable talk shows. I hope we don't go that way across the board. One of the things that I've always really liked about, and I lived and worked in London for 3 years, so I saw the underbelly of the British press system. And I think that our system is much fairer. It's much more, there's a huge premium placed on accuracy here and fairness. And I hope it doesn't come to that. I think the networks have positioned themselves so they're going to try and stay that way. But it's one of the problems when you have, it's one of the, I won't say it's a problem, but we have a lot more voices now.
Yeah.
You've got you've got the internet, you've got cable TV, you've got all these outlets that you didn't have 20 years ago, even. And it's more voices, whether it's better, whether the truth gets sort of washed out in the din, I don't know. It bothers me sometimes to talk to people who think that something that they heard or read on the internet is true when in fact it's not even close to being true. We're losing grasp of the facts.
Okay, we're going to have to stop so we can get to the awards. Steve, I want to thank you very, very much. It was really
Thank you.
interesting.
It's great being here.